Okay, guys, so this is lesson 8.1, dividing fractions and whole numbers. So go ahead and get your book out and open up to page 491. You can pause the video if you have not gotten that out already and come back to me when you're ready. So your essential question is, how do I divide a whole number by a fraction and divide a fraction by a whole number? So the materials you need are fraction strips. Now you're welcome to print these off. You can just Google Go Math fraction strips and print them off and cut them out. I'm just gonna draw them for today. Instead of printing them out and cutting them or laminating them, I'm just gonna draw them. All right, so Mia walks 2-mile fitness trail. She stops to exercise every 1/5 of a mile. How many times does Mia stop to exercise? So here's our number line. Draw a number line from 0 to 2. So there's your 0, there's your 2, 1's in the middle. Divide the number line into fifths. So I'm going to divide 0 to 1 into fifths. So here's 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5. Then I'm going to divide from 1 to 2 into more fifths. 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5. Okay, so now we're going to skip count by fifths from 0 to 2 to find out 2 divided by 1/5, because that's what she's doing here. She's walking 2 whole miles and she's stopping every 1/5 of a mile to do like push-ups or sit-ups or whatever she's doing. So we're trying to figure out how many times does she stop. So we're taking 2 miles and we're dividing it by 1/5. We're trying to see how many times can 1/5 fit into 2 holes. So here's 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, 10 times. So there are 10 1/5s in 2 holes. You can use your relationship between multiplication and division to explain and check your answer. Record and check the quotient. So we already know that 2 holes divided by 1/5 is 10 because 10 times 1/5 equals 2, does it? 10 times 1/5 equals, well, 10 times 1 is 10 over 5, and 10 divided by 5 equals 2 holes. So that does work. So Mia stops to exercise 10 times. Roger has 2 yards of string. He cuts the string into pieces that are 1/3 yard long. How many pieces of string does Roger have? So model 2 using 2 whole fraction strips. So I'm just going to draw those 2 whole fraction strips right over here. Here's 1 hole, 2 holes. Okay, so he cuts the string into pieces that are 1/3 yard long. How many pieces of string does Roger have? So we have our 2 using 2 whole fraction strips. Then place enough 1/3 strips to fit exactly under the 2 holes. So how many would go down here? 3. And how many would go down here? 3. So there's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Okay, so there are how many 1/3s, third size pieces in the 2 holes? Well, there's 3 here and 3 here, so there's a total of 6 1/3s. Record and check your quotient. So 2 divided by 1/3. So I'm trying to see how many times can 1/3 fit into 2. Well, there's 3 1/3s in 1 hole, so there's 6 1/3s in 2 holes. So that equals 6 because 6 times 1/3 equals 2, does it? Well, 6 times 1/3, 6 times 1 is 6 over 3, and 6 divided by 3 equals 2. So Roger has 6 pieces of string. So the other side, oh, my favorite, the draw the conclusions. When you divide a whole number by a fraction, how does the quotient compare to the dividend? Explain. So when you divide a whole number by a fraction, so let's do 2 divided by 1/3, like we just did. And our quotient was 6. So how does the quotient compare to the dividend? This is the quotient, and this is the dividend. So the quotient is greater than the dividend. Now, why is that so special? Well, when we do traditional division without fractions, so like 8 divided by 4 equals 2, usually your quotient is smaller than your dividend because you're trying to break that dividend into groups. And this would, if I took 8 and I broke it up into 4 groups, I would have 2 in each group, right? So your quotient is usually smaller than your dividend, but because you're using a number that is less than 1, your quotient is actually going to be larger because I'm trying to figure out how many 1/3 fit into 2. 6 1/3 do. Explain how knowing the number of fifths in 1 could help you find the number of fifths in 2. Well, if you know that there are 5 fifths equals 1, how many would there be in 2? 5 fifths plus 5 fifths equals 10 fifths, right? So explain how knowing the number of fifths in 1 could help you find the number of fifths in 2. You can add 5 fifths to 5 fifths. Describe how you would find 4 divided by 1/5. So how many times can 1/5 fit into 4? Well, one way you could do this is how many fifths could fit into 1 whole? 5 fifths. How many fifths can fit into 2 wholes? Another 5 fifths. And the third whole, another 5 fifths. And the fourth whole, another 5 fifths. So 5 fifths plus 5 fifths plus 5 fifths plus 5 fifths equals 20 fifths, which then equals 4. Describe how you would find how many times, which equals 20. So how many total fifths do you have? You have 20 fifths. So 4 can be broken up, or how many times can 1/5 fit into 4? 20 times, right? All right, so let's take a look at this down here. You can use fraction strips to divide a fraction by a whole number. So Celia shares half a package of clay equally among herself and 2 of her friends. So there's 3 total people, right? So there's half a package of clay, and there's 3 people that are gonna split that up. What fraction of the whole package of clay will each friend get? So you place a half strip under a whole strip. So here's my half strip under my whole strip. So this is the whole package of clay, but that's not what I have. I have a half a package of clay, right? So I want to find out how much of the whole package would each person get if you only have half. I know that sounds tricky, but if you just look at this picture and follow along, it should make sense. So you find 3 fraction strips, all with the same denominator that fit exactly under the 1/2. So what is that? So what's the equivalent fraction to 1/2 if the denominator is or if the numerator would be 3, because you have 3 of them, right? So if the numerator is 3, how do I get from 1 to 3? Times 3, and I do that to the denominator 2. So it's 6. So this right here, all of this is equivalent to 3/6. Well, what is one of them? 1/6, right? So each piece is 1/6 of the whole. Record and check the quotient. So 1/2 divided by 3 equals 6 because is 1/6 because 1/6 times 3 equals 1/2. Does it? 1/6 times 3 equals 3/6, which equals 1/2. It does work. So each friend will get 1/6 of the whole package of clay. So if you have that 1/2, and this to me is a little confusing, so I like to do it more, put it all together. So let's say this is the 1/2 of clay that you have, right? And we're gonna split that amongst the 3 friends. Well, if I split this up into 3, I have to split that imaginary part of the package that we don't have, right? Because it's how much of the whole package did each person get? Well, right here, this is one piece out of how much is now would have been in the whole if we would have had the whole 1/6, right? So each person's going to get 1/6. All right, so you guys can go ahead and do the share and show on your own, and I will or in the same link, I'll post the answers to this, and you can check your work once you're finished.